Rishi, what can I say? I'm so thrilled to be doing this. Our first ever politician on the show, and I so appreciate you taking the time out to join me today.
Great, Harry. Fantastic to join you. I didn't realise I was the first. Let's hopefully not the last, right? So
I'm sure not the last, but I always love to set a bit of context. And when I was doing my prep for the show, I read that your first job was waiting tables in a restaurant. I always think these are quite like formative roles, being the first that we have. So how did that time impact your mindset, and what were the takeaways?
So you are right. That was one of my first proper jobs. And, I guess what it taught me was, having a job, whatever the job is really important. I mean, I wasn't doing the most glamorous work, right? I was setting up tables, I was clearing them away, cleaning things, doing all the linen at the end of the night, and setting up for the next day, all that stuff. And at some point, I got to take people's drinks orders, which was an upgrade by the end of it. But so look, it wasn't glamorous work; it was hard work, but it was amazing to have a job. It was amazing to go to a place for the first time, to do something fulfilling. You get paid for it, which is good. But it actually just understanding what it's like to go and work and be part of a team, and those skills and that experience is more important than learning how to set a table in that sense. So just I think the having of a job, regardless of how glamorous or hard it is critical, especially when you're young and starting out. So that's probably the most important takeaway. I think the other thing is, look, it was a restaurant, it's in the hospitality industry, and over the last year, it's an industry that's had a really tough time, and it's an industry that I care a lot about. It employs a lot of people like me, long time ago, young people getting their first start, getting their first paycheck, and it also brings vitality, life to our way of life, right? It's the hum and the buzz of the high street, a town centre, a village, and seeing what happened was really sad to me, which is why you've seen quite a lot of effort from me and the government to try and support that industry, because I think it's important.
I have to admit, I'd love to share with you in that gainful employment, but I think I'm completely unemployable, which is why I've always set up my own business. I don't think anyone would ever hire me, which is probably a good thing. I do want to move forward a little bit, though, because then you obviously spent time at Stanford and graduated from Stanford, which is such a unique perspective and ecosystem to be a part of. How do you think that impacted your mindset today, given that unique experience?
Yeah, well, look, what's it known for? I mean, other than the weather, is obviously it's a home of entrepreneurship, creativity, innovation, and those are probably the most important ways in which it changed my life, right? In terms of the trajectory that I was on, and it broadened my mindset out considerably, because you're in that world surrounded by that culture. And we've tried to bring that into my job here, right? I've talked about trying to create this startup Treasury mentality, where we just do things a bit differently. We do things a bit more creatively and innovatively. So that's probably how it's impacted me here. I think the other thing that Stanford does is that it teaches you to think bigger than incrementally. And I think that was a change in approach for me, right? Just getting out of a more incremental mindset to a slightly bigger, more dynamic approach to change, and probably thirdly, and this is a bit practical. What is it? I was there for an MBA, and it's a place that's a home of technology. So those two things have stayed with me: the importance of technology and the importance of actually understanding management and how businesses work. Which is why we ultimately created something called Help to Grow in the budget, which is, I hope, will be something that stays in this country for a very long time. That's a scheme to help small and medium-sized businesses get the management training they need, mini MBAs, which we know have an enormous difference on people's productivity, profits, employment, but also help to grow digital, to help small companies adopt new technology like CRM or ERP or accounting, which again will be good for them and good for the country. So it very much, that experience helped me create these two schemes.
Do you know what's so fascinating is this next question I ask a lot of CEOs who have kind of very large and kind of impactful organizations, but you mentioned the startup treasury mindset there. I'm just too interested. How do you think about creating that safe place for people coming to work to make those more innovative, out there, but also courageous decisions without the fear of maybe failing or repercussions? Because it's a difficult thing as a leader. How do you think about creating that environment where they feel they can, even if it may not work?
Yeah, it's difficult in business. It's even more difficult in politics and in government, right? Where we're just not set up well to be able to say, look, we're going to try some things, knowing that some of them are not going to work, but it's important that we do things, and because we've got to figure out new ways to do things, and we've tried to do that, right? I've launched so many new policies and schemes over the past 12, 18 months. Is it going to be the case that every single one of them is brilliant in retrospect? No, probably not, right? But we were making policy in a crisis, and you've just got to, we were dealing with a pretty much unprecedented situation. So unsurprisingly, we had to throw some unprecedented solutions at it and not quite know exactly what was going to work, what exactly was going to make the difference. And ultimately, I think what I try and do inside the Treasury is people need to feel confident that I'm willing to go and front them up and ultimately take responsibility for them and explain to the country why we've tried some things. And look, if they turn out in retrospect not to have worked, so be it, that's on me. But hopefully that gives them the confidence to come up and present me with interesting ideas, knowing that you've got someone who's willing to try some things. And you can see that in the policy making we've done.
Final one before we move into the meat of the show, but I do just have to ask, when you have product launches, you have post-mortems on how well they went. When you have new policies, like you mentioned there, do you do post-mortems on what went well, what didn't? How do you think about measuring effectiveness and success as a team of the policies that you create?
Yeah, we do. I mean, government has a very formal process where you review policies on some fixed time frame, as you might imagine. But we're constantly doing that, because a lot of what I've done is still bedding in, right? So it's not as if it's done. So we're constantly iterating it as it's going, which again is probably a novel approach, right? And being okay with that, and I'm quite okay with that. But, again, it's easier to do in a pandemic, but happy to say, look, we've started this thing. Some of our loan schemes being a good example of that, and they didn't work day one, right? But that's okay. And we said, look, well, these are clearly not working. We're going to go back, we're going to iterate, we're going to change this, change that, and it got it to a place where it did. So I think we're still doing that, and then after the fact, we definitely sit down. I do, because I'm constantly you want to be on a journey of continuous improvement, right? You want to just learn from what you did well, so you can embed it. The things that didn't go well, learn from them so you don't do them again. So actually, we have that mindset generally here, that we're always doing that and figuring out what can we do better, what do we learn from our mistakes. But I think that's vital for any organization, right? I mean, that you don't progress without that kind of mindset.
It absolutely is. It's just interesting for me interviewing you now, the parallels between kind of startup and business CEO-ship and what you do. It's fascinating on the other side of the table for me to see that. I do have to ask, because another element of any kind of great leader is actually talent attraction. And when we think about, the UK today, I really want to understand, what do you think in terms of what do we need to do in the UK to become a global talent hub and to be that talent magnet? What do you think we need to do?
So this is really important, and I think whenever I speak to people in your industry, probably the number one thing they talk to me about is people, right? So the success of all your businesses are based on the quality of the people you have, and I wanted to tackle the immigration side of it in the budget. And you say attract. I want this to be the best place for people to come. I want us to be able to attract the best and the brightest. So at the budget, we announced what I think are probably the most far-reaching set of reforms to high-skill migration that we've seen in this country for years. So we said we're going to introduce an unsponsored visa, right? So it's not linked to a job, it's a points-based, unsponsored visa. We said we're going to launch a new, as part of that, a scale-up visa, which is something that had been recommended to us by the fintech review that we had done. But we're going to broaden it beyond fintech. So there'll be a specific scale-up stream. We're going to reform our global talent visa, because it's got quite a narrow definition of who counts as talented. So we're going to broaden it out to a much greater group of people with prizes and accomplishments. And then our innovative visa, which many of your colleagues will be familiar with, is we're going to reform it to make it easier for people who want to found a business and have the skills to do so, to get that visa that will enable them to do it. That has definitely not worked as well as we would have wanted it to. And we're going to expand the Global Entrepreneur Program, which is our outreach effort, where my vision is we have a UK person who's at Stanford trying to figure out who the best and brightest are over there, and come and attract them to the UK whilst they're actually doing their MBA or their computer science degree or whatever it might be. So on all of those things, we're making we announced them all at budget. We're going to make progress on them during the year and then implement them as we go. I think if we do all of those things, I think we can confidently say that this is probably the country with the most supportive regime for attracting talented people to come work here, set up businesses, or work in growing companies.
No, I totally agree, and I thought it was amazing to see those kind of policy introductions. I guess a question that I have is, like, with those fantastic introductions, if you take the alternative stance, which is kind of looking back or on review, are there elements where you look at some of the policies, or you look at some elements and you're like, with hindsight, I would have done this differently, or we could have changed that, or we could have altered that better? Are there elements where you would have done it differently?
I mean, we were talking before we started about the Future Fund as something that we did that was hopefully important for this community that I care a lot about. What worked, I think it serves as a good example of the kind of mindset we approach. One is we moved quite quickly, so start to finish it happened very quickly. We worked with industry. So we didn't just sit here in an ivory tower to try and develop the policy. We were out, almost beta testing it, with people who have to interact with it when it launches to get the design of it right from the get-go. And then it has a name and it has a brand. And you've seen that across what we've tried to do. I think government can't be so removed from people, right? People need to understand what we're doing, not just so hopefully they're grateful for it, but they can hold us accountable for it. So across whether it's bounce back loans or the Future Fund, we've tried to do things that will then ultimately resonate and connect with people. So that I think and the brand is great. I think it speaks to what we're trying to do with it, and people have responded well to it. What we got wrong is we obviously underestimated the demand for the product, so our kind of market analysis was probably a bit off. So we had to upsize it and do that quickly because people were worried that it would run out and there was this fixed thing. Even though I'd said at the beginning, look, if there's more demand, we will increase it. That message hadn't got through. So actually, at the beginning, people were really panicked and upset that it would be a fixed part and that they didn't apply in the next day or two. So that was on us to communicate that better at the beginning, but ultimately we upsized it and it was fine. And what was going to be a £250 million fund ended up being a £1 billion fund. And then there was a constant debate about where do you set the lower threshold. I've got to balance two things there. There'll be good companies who say, look, we haven't raised that much money and we only want to raise a little bit more. And you're not letting us because we haven't raised enough money previously. I've got to balance that against, look, this is taxpayers' money. By having these thresholds and the match fund, that's my way to try and protect taxpayers as much as possible, because I'm not sitting here, and nor my team, making investment decisions. This is if you meet these criteria, you get cash. And so we need the criteria to do the heavy lifting of trying to ensure that we are broadly backing companies that are likely to go on and do well. And that's why we had to have some of these thresholds and criteria in there, and that people are going to debate, are they, some people will say they're too lenient and too many companies that shouldn't have got money will get money. Others are going to say that they're too strict and you're missing out on some good opportunities. But that balance is one that we probably won't know for some years whether we got it right or not. I'm
going to be totally honest. When I look at what you do, I always feel quite sorry for you, because I think whatever you do, someone will always be unhappy. So
that is an accurate reflection.
So, you know what? I sympathise in that respect. Can I ask a kind of tough one? But people suggested it before the show, and I want to understand more. And it's like, on entrepreneurs relief, people were asking about its removal, and I wanted to understand, why would it be beneficial to remove it, and what's the logic behind it?
Well, you know what? We talked about branding actually before. That's one of these things which is is misnamed, right? Because it's why do you want to get rid of this thing that sounds good for entrepreneurs? You like entrepreneurs. Here we are talking about the importance of entrepreneurship. So I think, look, in a nutshell, the relief is not doing what it said on the tin, right? It was being used for lots of other things, and actually had been cited by lots of policy experts, whether it's think tanks or others, as being a really awful relief. I think one of them called it the UK's worst tax relief. And the reason for that was, you had lots of people who were not genuine entrepreneurs who were able to use it to essentially just reduce their tax bill. And that's not what it's there for. It was not having any real impact on people saying, well, I'm starting this company because of entrepreneurs relief. I mean, how many times have you heard that from anyone you've met? So I think given all of that, we were able to not scrap it as many people wanted us to do, but reform it. 80% of the people who were using the relief before still benefit from what's been put in place. So actually the vast majority of people who were using it will be unaffected. But by reforming it, we've managed to tackle some of those things that we didn't like. And if you think more generally about, look, do you get rewarded as an entrepreneur for working really hard, building a business and creating wealth? In this country, you do. If you look at capital gains tax rates, effective capital gains tax rates, on the same, you have a brilliant, you create your unicorn, good for you, right? And you're going to make a lot of cash. You'll probably pay 20% capital gains tax rates in the UK on all of that. In France, when all is said and done, you're probably paying closer to 30. And in California, which we all love and celebrate, you're probably paying closer to 37, right, when you add all the state taxes in. So look, is this a place that rewards entrepreneurship financially from a tax perspective? 100% it does.
Totally with you. On the cap gains side, how do you think about using cap gains as a way to incentivize ambition, incentivize attraction to the UK? How do you think about using it as a tool and as leverage to really make sure the best are built here and we inspire the next generation of entrepreneurs to build in the UK, I guess?
So I just gave you those stats, right? So on those stats, we rank really favorably. And I think we should, right? This should be an attractive place for people to come and do it. I think people sometimes fixate on the tax side. It's one of many things in our shop window, right? That's what I always say. We actually just had there was a survey out this morning I saw in my press read from E&Y, which was talking about the UK. They do a survey of businesses about where they're going to do FDI, for example, and we ranked, I think, top, and the intention to invest in the UK is the highest it's been since whenever they've been doing the survey, which hopefully is a decent long time, so that stat actually means something. But that just gives you a sense of it. This is an attractive place to invest. Taxes as one part of the shop window, but you talked about skills. I hear that more than I hear about tax when I talk to businesses or entrepreneurs. Skills and people are probably the most important thing, and then things that the government is doing to invest in, whether it's R&D and innovation and in infrastructure, whether that's building broadband or anything else. Those are the kinds of things people want to care about as well as just tax. And I think when you look at all these measures, OECD, World Bank, Forbes, World Economic Forum, we consistently rank as one of the best places to come and do business anywhere in the world. And that's something I'm proud of, and it will continue.
You mentioned the trade-offs earlier. I love this one, which is like, I think a lot of people think, you can do a lot of things just freely, but we know it's not quite that easy. So I guess, what are the things that people and we assume government can and should do, but in reality, it's not that easy and you can't just do that? Are there striking ones?
Gosh, yeah. I mean, look, people always want you to do everything, right? And it's not their job to deal with the trade-offs, as you said, yeah. Right? So they kind of assume, they assume, that their thing is the most important, and they're not having to worry about what everyone else thinks is the most important thing. And people generally don't ever worry about who's going to pay for it. So I get out of the 100 people that say something to me, probably 99 of them are, please, can you spend some money on something? And maybe one of them is that here's an idea for you to raise some money to pay for it. So that's probably the slight unbalance in the engagement I have.
I'm sure. No, I'm totally with you there. Can I ask, in terms of we mentioned kind of future fund earlier, in terms of catalyzing other investment, pension funds aren't traditionally as invested in venture and the startup ecosystem as maybe they are in other countries. What do you think we can do to catalyze this and other inflows of investment into the sector beyond, future fund, which is amazing, but obviously can't be relied upon, for eternity?
Yeah, no, it can't, right? Because it's not the government's job fundamentally to do that long term, right? It's one thing to step in a acute crisis to make sure we don't lose an important part of our innovative ecosystem. Yeah, but you're right. It's not the sustainable long term solution. And you're right about our pension fund industry, right? We have either the second or third largest pension fund industry, I think, in the world. It has historically, when you benchmark it to places like the US or Canada or others, underinvested in illiquid assets like VC and PE, and it's been a long-standing feature. We're trying a couple of things to change it. One is something called the Long-Term Asset Fund, which is a new model that we're working on with the Bank of England, the FCA, and the industry to create a vehicle that hopefully will deal with some of the liquidity issues that pension funds have whilst investing in illiquid assets. So we announced that a while back, and that work in November last year. So that work is ongoing, and hopefully by the end of this year it will be established. And that's something that everyone's excited about, to try and unlock some capital. The other thing is this thing called the charge cap, which the slightly more technical minded members of your community will know about. There are some rules and regulations about the fees that pension funds are allowed to I guess charge, and then ultimately therefore determines what they can invest in. And I think what we've heard is those rules potentially are too restrictive and inflexible to deal with the lumpiness of VC returns and indeed the nature of them. And what we're doing is consulting on whether you can, for example, smooth that. So this charge cap has an annual limit on the fees. VC returns can be very lumpy, so you get very large years of return. Then you breach this fee threshold. Well, that's a bit silly if on all the other years you've been doing the losses of your J. So we're looking at smoothing some of that out and introducing a bit more flexibility to it. It's been a call from the industry for a long time, and hopefully we can get on and fix it, and that will help. But I think the most important thing is probably cultural. And that is a hard thing. You asked before, what can governments not do? And that is probably, I should have said it then. Governments, it's hard for governments to change the culture. That we can provide nudges and fiscal incentives to try and get people to do things. But changing the culture is quite a hard thing to do for a government to do.
But I always think bluntly, you're not humanized enough. Like, there's a human Rishi behind the brand, and I always think I really want to know what that's like. So I'm going to ask you some really human questions that actually loads of people want to know. What does your morning look like, Rishi? What time do you get up? What's your go-to for breakfast?
Right. Okay. Morning. So, what time do I get? I get up I get up later than I used to, because I'm more tired, sadly, than I used to be. So anywhere from 6 to 7 in that range, depending on what gym I'm doing. So I have 2 young kids, 2 girls. So part of that is school and everything, getting them ready for that. In terms of breakfast, I do some intermittent fasting. So on those days, nothing. Otherwise, I probably have Greek yogurt and blueberries during the week. And then I have a second breakfast mid-morning, which is either the Gale cinnamon morning bun or a pain au chocolat or a chocolate chip muffin. So I have one chocolatey, sugary pastry at some point. And then at the weekend, we have a full cooked breakfast on Saturdays. And on Sundays, we alternate between pancakes and waffles. So we do pancakes, but American style. So the American thin, crispy bacon, blueberries, strawberries, and pancakes. That's Sunday. And then we interchange pancakes and waffles every week.
I'm so glad that the diet gradually got worse. I was feeling terrible about my life there for a second.
It's bad during the week. I mean, because I have this problem with I need to have this sugary pastry thing most mid-mornings. You
mentioned the gym element. What's the exercise routine? You're a very active person, Rishi. What does the exercise routine look like for you? I know you're a Peloton man too.
So I do. Well, it's been destroyed, my exercise routine, by this job. So sadly, that's the first thing to say. I mean, I used to try and do 3 days a week, but I mix it between doing probably one session on Peloton, one session on the treadmill, and then one HIIT class. Normally I'm in North Yorkshire at the weekends in my leisure centre there. They've got a great Sunday morning HIIT class. So I do that when I can, and then otherwise, treadmill and Peloton during the week.
Last one before the quick fire round. But I remember watching your first budget, and I thought it was one of the best budgets I'd ever seen. I remember watching it with my brother, who doesn't like finance, and he was inspired, and I thought, Jesus, that's quite a thing if you inspired him. But my point being, were you nervous being your first budget, and how do you deal with nerves today?
I was very nervous when I did my first budget. I think I got the job about 3.5 weeks before, and I was extremely nervous. It's a big day in Parliament. It's packed. One of the few occasions where every seat is taken or everyone's standing as well. So it's it's a stressful environment anyway, especially when you've only had the job 3 weeks. It's the only time, I don't know how I got through it, but the only time my wife has ever come to see me do anything in Parliament was that day. So there's a gallery at the top, and she came and sat opposite, and I kept looking up at her a lot. before I started. So that's kind of how I just about got through that. And then you get a lot of support from your colleagues. Politics is a team sport, and you've got lots of your colleagues all around you, and they're willing you to succeed and cheering you on, and that really helps. So a combination of them and the unique appearance by my wife in Parliament helped. And how do I deal with it today? Gosh, I don't know if I have any secret. I guess first of all, it's okay to be nervous. I guess. I mean, I'm always, I get nervous when I do, mainly when you do live TV, right? That's probably the thing that is most nerve-wracking, because it's unpredictable and what you say matters, and people pick apart any word or phrase. But I say to people, look, I do it when I'm talking to school kids in my constituency. I was like, it's totally okay to be nervous. I get nervous, and so if you're getting nervous when you're doing your debate class at school, that's okay. You just gotta try and imagine you're not speaking to the person you're speaking to, is my general advice. Just imagine you're speaking to your parents or something, and if you do that, I feel it's generally easier.
Yeah, no, my grandmother always told me to imagine the audience naked, but that rather distracted me, so I discarded that piece of advice. I do want to move into a quick fire there, Rishi. So I say a short statement, you hit me with your immediate thoughts. Ready to roll?
Okay.
What's your favourite book and why?
Oh my gosh. Right. I mean, some of my favourites are like A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth, Count of Monte Cristo, Kill a Mockingbird, Harper Lee, but probably my favourite, if you're going to force me, is Roald Dahl. He was, I absolutely loved all Roald Dahl books. Going Solo is one of my all-time favourite books. So Roald Dahl, probably favourite author, and Going Solo, and Boy, his autobiography, probably my favourite books.
What's the hardest element of your role today, Rishi?
We talked about it. It's the hardest thing is trying to divide up the pie, right? And that is the hardest part of my job. We have a pie. It's a big pie. It's a growing pie. But dividing it up is tough, and because that means I have to say no to some people, and everyone will want the pie split a slightly different way, or thinks we could just magically have a bigger pie. So that is without question that decision, those trade-offs are the hardest thing.
What advice do you often give but find hard to take?
Oh, delegate, and don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I'm very guilty of not doing enough of either of those.
If you could change one thing with the wave of a wand, what would it be?
Probably I'd have all Coke be Mexican Coke.
and then final one, if we sit down in 5 years' time and everything's gone to plan, where would we be, Rishi?
Gosh, 5 years' time. Well, lots of people have lost their jobs, in the past year. That's the thing that is motivating me the most, is helping people get into work. So, 5 years' time, I just want to get everyone into work, get everyone back into work, create as many jobs as possible, fix our borrowing and debt, which has obviously taken an absolute hammering, and get that back under control is an important part of my job, and one I take seriously. It's one of my responsibilities. And lastly, it's that we emerge from this, remaining one of the best places for people to grow their businesses, to create new products, to create new services. This remains a home of innovation in all its guises, and that all of that activity ultimately creates new things for people that makes our lives better and richer to lead, but in the process creates employment for people, creates jobs, creates wealth for our country. So this is just a fantastic place to be.
Rishi, this has been so much fun to do. So thank you so much for joining me today, and it's been a huge pleasure.
Absolute pleasure, Harry. Thanks so much.
You are a star.